Good afternoon, and you've heard it 100 times today, I'm sure, but thank you all for taking the time to come in and come to the KACo conference. And I was telling our KMCA group this morning that for anyone that's new in the audience, the best way to learn your job and learn what you can do is learn from your fellow elected officials across the state, because like they said earlier, if it's a great idea, you can take it home and you never have to give credit to someone else. You can take it as your own idea and take all the credit. And I'm not denying or confirming that I've ever done that. So thank you again for being here. I'm David Livingston, Scott County Magistrate and KACo First Vice President. It's my honor to introduce our next speaker, Commissioner of Agriculture, Dr. Ryan Quarles. He will be interviewed today by Ellie McGowan, President of Murray State University Student Government and granddaughter of Squire Elbert Bennett. Please give a warm welcome to Commissioner Quarles and Miss McGowan.
Hello, everyone. How are we doing today? Good? Good. We enjoying the KACo conference so far? Yeah? Good. Well, it's such an honor and a privilege to be here today with Agriculture Commissioner Quarles. We've spoken many times about Kentucky agriculture, but I have to say, speaking with him about Kentucky agriculture here today at the KACo conference has to be one of my favorites. So, Commissioner Quarles, thank you for being here to share your office's efforts on promoting all things Kentucky agriculture here with our elected officials. Thank you. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. Our first question is, there's no doubt that there seems to be a rural-urban divide in all facets of our society today. What are some factors that contribute to this divide, and what can a statewide leader like yourself do to help bridge that divide?
Well, thank you, and good afternoon. Congratulations on the recent elections. I look forward to working with you all again in the near future. And before we get started, she's the student body president at Murray State University. That's worth a round of applause. So thank you for everything you've done. We've worked together. Murray has a wonderful agricultural program. But to get to the point, the urban-rural divide, I think, is real. We see it in politics. We see it in socioeconomic conversations. And some of the things that contribute to that, as I travel the state, I've traveled to 110 counties since June 1st. And we'll hit the other 10 here shortly, is that I'm an observer. And so what we're seeing, I think, is we're seeing the urban areas on the political scale, they're starting to vote more Democratic. And the rural areas are starting to vote more Republican. And that's not a Kentucky thing, that's nationwide. If you look at the map of Georgia just last week, it's a big red state with a few little dots of blue. And you're gonna see it again with the runoff, the fourth election in just 2 years for U.S. Senate seat. And so politically, you're starting to see that. And you're starting to see it with counties flipping. We saw it last week with election results across the state. And people ask me, is this a healthy thing? I don't think it's healthy. I don't think that on the political spectrum, rural areas becoming, just Republican, urban areas becoming just Democrat is healthy for the state, because we've got to work together. We've got to work together. And so one of the things I think about is what brings us together every day, and that's food. Everybody, hopefully, gets 3 meals a day. That's something that brings us together, agriculture. And so one thing I think we can do better is to promote those events that bring both the farm folks and the city folks together. We do this through farm-to-table dinners, which, by the way, our office has a grant program right now. If your county would like to host one of these. We have 90 county fairs in Kentucky. We're very heavy on county fairs. We're actually met this afternoon to award county fair grants as well. If you go to Louisville, Kentucky right now, as we speak, the largest purebred livestock show in the world is in Louisville, Kentucky. Do anybody know that? Do anybody know that the biggest livestock show in the world is hosted by Kentucky? We have 140,000 people visiting our fairgrounds right now, 23,000 exhibits. We're sending embryos as far away as the Sudan every year with export opportunities. But for me, I think it's so important that we don't start pointing fingers. We don't start pointing fingers, because I'm one of 9 people that are elected statewide in Kentucky, and I'm very sensitive about maintaining and growing relationships in the urban areas where we help educate people about where their food comes from, and also in our rural areas so that we can have a better understanding. And I'll just take another example here. There's a food crisis in Kentucky. And if you live in rural areas, you may not have a Kroger. There's some counties without a Walmart. And Walmart's the biggest grocery store in the United States. And so now we're starting to see people buy their groceries at Dollar General's, which, by the way, is over 600 of those across Kentucky. And I have a commitment to visit every single one of them over the next year. But if you live in the city area, you may not know that that's where your food comes from. That's the local grocery. And you might be utilizing, since COVID, grocery delivery services, and that's the norm. That's something that just isn't available in some parts of rural Kentucky as well. So for me, it's about breaking bread. Anytime you can have an event, particularly if you're in a county, a high growth county like Scott County, where you have constantly new folks moving into your community, it's so important that the rural aspect of a community connects and communicates with the urban areas as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. One of the big issues and one of the big topics that we're going to be talking about today is economic opportunity. And whenever some people hear the word agriculture, their minds immediately go to rural. And while rural agriculture is important, would you mind to expand on the bigger picture in agriculture across all of Kentucky?
Well, agriculture is big, and looking out across the crowd today, you see the heads of many rural counties, and chances are agriculture is the #1 industry in your county. Chances are, or it's top 3 at the very low bottom end of it. Agriculture is $50 billion of economic activity in the state every year. If you look at our state GDP, just over 200 million, math is simple. We're close to 20%, if not a fourth, of all the economic activity in Kentucky is agriculture. We are the second biggest employer in our state. A lot of folks don't realize that. There's only one industry that employs more Kentuckians than agriculture, and that's manufacturing, which continues to grow in our state. And so a lot of folks, particularly in Frankfort or some friends in the urban areas, don't realize how big of an economic footprint agriculture has. And here's just a few accolades for our farm community. We're the biggest beef cattle state east Mississippi River. That's $1 billion a year just in beef cattle. Corn and soybeans are both $1 billion crop in our state. Wheat, a $500 million crop. Tobacco still brings in over $250 million for around 1,000 farmers across our state, and that's how I paid for my college, working on a tobacco farm. And we haven't even talked about the equine industry, which tens of thousands of jobs. And it's not just central Kentucky. We're talking about quarter horses as well, which is the biggest horse breed in the United States. Saddlebreds, very special to Shelby County with the surrounding areas. And so when you look at the imprint of agriculture, it's not just cows, plows, and sows. It's about economic activity. And we haven't even started talking about food companies yet. Raise your hand if you've ever had a biscuit from McDonald's in your life. All right. I think there's some liars out there. I think just about everybody has had a biscuit at some point. Every single biscuit served at McDonald's anywhere on the East Coast United States comes from Kentucky, period. So what we're doing is that we're not just growing crops and raising livestock, we're adding value to it as well. 100% of all the sausage served at Cracker Barrel nationwide comes from Kentucky. Most of the sausage served from Dairy Queen on this side of Mississippi comes from Kentucky. And then, of course, when you fill your tank up with fuel right now, 10% of it is corn. And we have an elevator down in Hopkinsville that liquefies it, not in the bourbon, but the ethanol. I have nothing to do with the price of gas. I just want to make that really clear right now. But those are ways that we're adding value to agriculture right now. It's also important to realize that Kentucky is one of only 4 states, I believe, that has an extension service, brick and mortar, in every single county. I know that a lot of you all help fund it. We appreciate that. It's a heavily utilized footprint across our state. We need to do more than just agriculture with extension, in my view, and we're heading that way right now. But when we talk about economic development and ag, please don't look at it in an antiquated way, where it's just farmers out in the field, because that is not what it's about right now. And if you want to look at the agritourism of agriculture, we have over 500 agritourism spots across the Commonwealth. September and October, big months for those. But now we're having people are getting married in barns now. My generation, I guess, loves to get married in tobacco barns. I'm not sure, but that's economic development in your counties. So please think about that. Think about that when zoning ordinance this has come across your desk as well. That we want to make sure that we help continue to add value to this as well. And I'll leave you with one last thought here. Meat processing. If there's anything that we learned during COVID is that there were some fractures in our food supply system nationwide. There was never a lack of food, but we could do a better job of promoting local food systems. We have invested over $7 million of tobacco settlement dollars back into 30 Kentucky-owned, Kentucky-proud meat processing plants across the state so that we can help use that strong and powerful Kentucky-proud brand that 85% of Kentuckians can identify what that means, so that now we're not just raising those cattle here, but we're going to process them as well, slap that Kentucky Proud sticker on the side, and that keeps that economic development money in the state. But I will say this, when we talk about economic development in rural counties, it's not just about utilities, it's not just about roads and water, it's about high-speed, quality, and affordable internet as well. It's time for us to finish the job on broadband.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. And your discussion on food supplies and food systems is actually going to segue very well into our next question. As commissioner, you established the Kentucky Hunger Initiative to bring together farmers, charitable organizations, faith groups, community leaders, and government entities to begin a dialogue to help reduce hunger in Kentucky. How can our members get involved?
Well, there's a few things that you can do. The holiday season's upon us. There's 3 things that anybody in this room can do. Number one, we're always asking for donations of food. Can't donate food, consider donating a little bit of money to Feeding Kentucky, which oversees the 7 regional food banks in our state and helps work the over 1,000 food pantries in Kentucky as well. If you can't donate food, can't donate money, consider donating time. There's always a need for people to roll up their sleeves, pack meals across Kentucky. So when I got started back in 2016, we decided to do something that is not required of us through KRS. There's no reg in Kentucky that says the Department of Agriculture has to do anything about food insecurity, but I thought that was an unjust way to view the office. The farmers, we're really proud, we're statistic oriented, we want to keep our yields going up, our efficiencies going up, our inputs going down. We're a very numerically based industry, but sometimes we don't talk about all of the consumers, including the consumers in our state that may not be able to afford a meal like you and I might take for granted every once in a while. Food insecurity is a big deal. 700,000 Kentuckians are food insecure. Our population is only 4.5 million, so you can do the math. And then when you start looking at sub-demographics, 1 in 5 K through 12 school students are food insecure. Let me tell you, if you're a child and you go to school hungry, the last thing on your mind is learning. And so we're so proud that we had House Bill 215 passed earlier this year that will allow those school districts that choose to do so to serve breakfast during the first 15 minutes of the school day. And so we want to do what we can to help out our Frisky officers as well with school backpack programs and, of course, summer feeding. Because food insecurity among kids doesn't magically disappear when school lets out in May and June. And so we're trying to bridge these gaps. I'm scheduled to testify before the United States Senate by the end of the year about this issue, that if we really want to have a humanitarian approach, if we want to help increase our school test scores, if we want to make sure that we don't inflict life trajectory issues at an early age in Kentucky, we've got to have a full court press on food insecurity. Now look at our elderly too. A big chunk of those retirees that pensions can't afford groceries or gas anymore or resorting to food banks. And I'll just give you a little statistic here. When the government was shut down over 2 years ago, we saw a 30% spike in the number of Kentuckians going to food banks and food pantries, many of whom for the first time in their life had to ask for food. And there's a stigma attached to that, an unfair stigma if you're unemployed, out of work. We got to make sure that we reduce that stigma and just say, look, there's help available, there's food out there. And as the economy is reopened, and we've restructured ourselves, we saw that number go down, but it's going right back up right now. And can you guess why? Inflation. Old man inflation. So just about anything that you consume is going to be on a semi-truck at some point. And so when you're looking, knocking on the door of $6 diesel fuel, even if it's available, with a big shortage ahead of us, we have a lot of Kentuckians heading to the holiday seasons that may not know where the next meal may come from. So you ask what you can do to help. Well, beyond an individual effort, your fiscal courts, your organizations can do this. Go talk with the people running your food pantries. In some counties, it's just one. They're looking for specific things. They're looking for refrigerators, and they're looking for freezers. We actually have had instances where farmers have donated food and they were rejected by the food pantry because they didn't have a freezer to put it in. That can be solved. Our office has funded over 300 freezers so far through some charitable organizations. We can do better. So if you want to put that perhaps in your budget, I know the need is big. They're also looking for shelving. Every once in a while, if a grocery store goes out of business, we'll try to encourage buying up all the shelves because they need shelving as well, and also facilities as well. Another thing that you can do, if you want to hear, is from Pulaski County. They have a one time a year fundraiser for their food banks, and they raise over $100,000 in one night, and they have fun with it. And there's ways to help fund through a charitable organization. Please let us know how we can be helpful. And on February 8th, I have 1 year left in office. We're going to have our last Serving Up Solutions dinner in Frankfort. This is where the legislators, I see Walker Thomas here and Leader Mead, they'll actually serve you dinner. If you would like to buy a table, let us know. We always have it early in session before people start really fighting with each other. So we try to do it where everyone has a good mood. But let us know how we can be helpful with your county's effort to combat food insecurity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And for our last question, we're going to touch on recent natural disasters that have happened here in Kentucky. So 2 areas of our state were hit very hard with natural disasters over the past year, with historic tornadoes in the west and historic flooding in the east, along with current forest fires, primarily affecting 2 of the more rural areas of our Commonwealth. I know that you were on the ground in both instances aiding our hurting communities. What is your impression of the agriculture communities today in both regions, and what should be done going forward to further assist them?
First off, Kentucky, we just can't catch a break. We have 110 Kentuckians who passed away just from these two horrific events. If you look out beyond the loss of life, let's take the tornado first. The number one industry that got pounded by the tornado was agriculture. And let's not forget, these tornadic events started in KACo, Kentucky, blew over a church right on the Tennessee line of Fulton County, and it wreaked havoc all the way to just south of Louisville, Kentucky. We had dead cattle in Spencer County, Kentucky. And so one thing we had to do immediately after the tornadoes was to go in with a big team, our state vet, and deal with the animal welfare issue. We had 30 chicken barns collapse. Over 300,000 birds had to be depopulated. We had cattle with shrapnel in them that we didn't know who owned, that we had to humanely put down. And there are farms that literally had to reestablish their property lines because the fences were gone, completely gone. Grain elevators missing, flattened. Mayfield grain, which holds 5.5 million bushels of grain, decimated. And then this time last year, before we knew it, going into holiday seasons, over 200 poultry farms got their feed from a location right next to the candle factory in Mayfield. 8 million eggs in 2 structures gone that were going to supply 200 farms in the area in Tennessee and Kentucky. And we had a feed mill go out too. And so we actually were on Christmas Day looking for people with CDLs that would be willing to drive chicken feed to these poultry farms because they're so dependent on a just-in-time arrival system. And so the good thing about the tornadoes, the recovery that is that farmers woke up the next day, many of whom didn't even check their farm. They're out clearing the rubble, helping out first responders, and that's amazing. But a lot of the folks that had tornado damage started cleaning up the next day because you could physically see the damage. You knew what was missing. Insurance companies were there. We know that there was a gap between insurance coverage and the cost of replacement continues to be an issue. So with Kentucky Farm Bureau and UK and KSU Extension, we started raising money to the private sector with the GoFundMe. We raised $1.5 million for those affected by the tornadoes. And we made sure that those farmers who are affected could only use those monies in Kentucky-owned ag retailers. So we kept that money local, and that's been great. We've exhausted those funds, and there's still some work to do. But with the floods, it's such a different type of damage. The tornadoes, you could wake up, you could see what was broken, get a wagon, start cleaning up the rubble. There's gonna be flat tires for the next 10 years because of the amount of nails and shrapnel out in our fields. But the floods were very different. And for those of you who've never been to deep eastern Kentucky, it's all about the magnitude of damage in what might be considered a small geographic area, but it just wiped out communities. You've got mud issues. You can't even get up to the hills and hollers in some of these places. We were doing helicopter drops of hay and feed into some areas because the roads didn't exist anymore. And we've raised over $300,000 for our flood victims. But one thing that our friends in Eastern Kentucky, I think, need more now than ever, and Western Kentucky, but particularly with Eastern Kentucky, are food donations. That's one thing that we're doing. We don't want to duplicate the efforts of other federal agencies. That if there's bottled water somewhere, we don't want to send them more bottled water. We want to focus in on our food pantries and community kitchens like Cane's Kitchen down in Whitesburg. And so if there's one thing you all can do to help out with that, please let us know, because going into these wintry months, we'll pick up the debris, we'll repair. We're supplying rentals of large equipment in Eastern Kentucky so people can get rid of the mud, as seemingly everywhere right now. Please consider the food aspect as well, because it's really difficult. A few things that we learned is that the federal government, particularly FEMA, was not very responsive. And I don't mean to throw grenades or arrows at our organization, but FEMA is not set up for rural America. It's not. There's a lot of frustration out there. And so we decided to pick up the baton. The federal agency wasn't going to be responsive as well. And there's another thing that a learning moment here is that we got to make sure that we are prepared for the next disaster. My office deals with deadly and contagious animal diseases. Some are called coronaviruses, if you ever heard of that before. We've had high path twice this year already. We've had an outbreak of CWD in our deer herds during hunting season. And so one thing that we're doing right now, one of our asks to the General Assembly come January, is that we want to do what 15 other states have already done in their departments of agriculture, is that we want to set up a permanent emergency response department within the Office of State Veterinarian. Dr. Katie Flynn, who we hired last year, our first female state veterinarian, we've worked on this, we're honed in, and so we want to develop a plan so that when these disasters occur, we're not pulling resources and pulling people out of the blue, that we have a better line of communication with our charitable organizations, et cetera. And so if there's any legislators in the crowd today, that's going to be our ask come January.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here with us today. That's all that we have, so please join me in a round of applause for Agriculture Commissioner Dr. Ryan Quarles.
Thank you. Thank you. And I talked to Ellie. We have a great internship program, Department of Ag, so if anybody has some relatives or friends that want to choose a career in agriculture, please let us know. I'm going to be around for the rest of the evening. I look forward to catching up, but thanks, Ellie.
Yes,
appreciate it.
Thank you.